I'm the Asterisk technical trainer with Digium, and I deliver the training for Asterisk. We have a couple of courses there. Has anyone been through the Digium Asterisk training before? All right, okay, a couple here. So, since you were here this morning, I won't have to repeat an awful lot of that. Essentially, this is a compression of the very beginning, the very basics of Asterisk. So, we'll be talking about more advanced Dialplan, endpoint configuration, different ways you can achieve that with Asterisk, all by its lonesome, no web-based GUIs used during the production of this talk. So anyhow, so yes, I'm Justin Hester, I'm DCAP 2252. Any DCAPs? Also maybe the wrong room, not necessarily. So, oh yeah, okay. Everyone's welcome. I hope you get something out of it. No. The DCAP, by the way, that's the Digium Certified Asterisk Professional. It's a technical certification. We're offering those exams here at AstriCon. We have a session every morning. Space is extremely limited, so if you haven't signed up already, we may not be able to pencil you in if you're looking for that. Also, if this is the first time you've really looked at Dialplan, you may want to back up a little bit and study before going for the DCAP, because it is essentially what we're looking at here. We're writing basic text files to configure Asterisk from scratch. So here's my email address. I'm on Twitter. I don't do a lot of tweeting. And full disclosure, that is my LinkedIn account. It's a real account. I will be glad to connect with you if you reach out to me. That's awesome. But don't be offended if it takes me a couple of days, because I sign into LinkedIn about once a week. I don't put a lot of time into that. So, all right, enough about me. Let's talk about what's going on here. So here's where we are, configuring endpoints. We'll talk about configuring SIP phones with Asterisk and a couple of ways to achieve this. And next is interactive Dialplan. After our break, we'll have advanced Dialplan. Other things going on right now, just as a note, Digium Cloud Services, Mark Amick is giving a talk about DCS. Anybody unfamiliar, or everybody familiar with DCS? It's a new offering from Digium, so it's cloud-based switchbox, essentially what's going on there. And let's see what else. Oh, free PBX phone apps for Digium phones. And that's everything that's going on right now that I'm up against. Okay. So let's talk about configuring endpoints. This is a three-step process. I try not to say three-step program, but sometimes when we get into a severe storm of debugging, you'll feel like you need a three-step program. Here we have configure the account on Asterisk, create an extension to dial the account, configure the endpoint to match. It's easy as that, right? Did Melissa happen to mention the separation between extensions and phones? All right, blank stares. So a little bit of this, okay? So essentially, we've been taught from birth to believe that an extension is a phone. In Asterisk, this isn't really so. An extension is how you trigger some behavior within your Dialplan. One of those things that happen may be, make this other phone ring. It could be, connect me to voicemail, or send an email to my administrator and tell them something's wrong, or change a Dialplan variable. So an extension is not necessarily a phone, and this is where we begin to separate that concept in your minds in Asterisk. So that's why there are three distinct steps, and configuring an account versus creating an extension are two separate steps. So here we are in the Etsy Asterisk directory in the sip.conf file. Who's heard of this file before? Okay, most of you. Who has hands? Well, at least one. All right. I will not discriminate. Okay, just checking. So here we have a very, very basic configuration. These are the 5 lines of text you need to configure a SIP phone in Asterisk. This is it. This is all you have to have. You can have an awful lot. You can have all sorts of behavior configured in sip.conf for a phone, but this is all you really need, and we're going to break these down on our next slide here. So in the square bracket, account name. Now, this is really an arbitrary name. It doesn't have to be an extension. Ideally, it wouldn't be for security purposes, actually, because this is an account name that the SIP phone will use to authenticate to Asterisk, all right? So maybe you'd give it some meaningful name like, Justin's phone, or something like this. Next we have a type. On the previous slide there was type equals friend. Has anyone had to delve into the type equals friend versus user versus peer situation? Yeah, okay, I'm seeing some sad looks in the room. So, what's your experience been with type equals peer versus friend or user? Oh, I see. Okay. So I'll attempt to repeat a short version for everybody there. Essentially, when connecting with certain providers, it has to be type equals peer, otherwise it won't work. With other providers, it has to be type equals friend, or it won't work. And this is, not predictable behavior. We don't like that when we're trying to configure something, especially with technology, right? So, why is this the case? Well, it really has to do with the way a friend, a user, and a peer are defined with an asterisk. Here we see a very, very short description. Type equals friend is a user and a peer. Type equals friend is a user and a peer. Type equals user is inbound calls. Type equals peer is outbound calls, but notice there's a little asterisk there. See next slide, which we will do. This has to do, again, with how is the endpoint, ultimately a phone or a trunk is an endpoint from the perspective of Asterisk. How does the endpoint actually authenticate with Asterisk? How does it connect to Asterisk? How do calls that come into Asterisk from this endpoint know where to go in your dial plan? So that's why you see that sort of behavior, and why we'll be talking about it here. Host equals dynamic. This is very handy in the world of DHCP because, hey, who wants to go around and configure, hard code an IP address for every phone? Does that sound like fun? Really? No? Shouldn't. I worry if you think that sounds like fun. Host equals dynamic. Endpoint needs to register. So in SIP, an endpoint, we're going to talk about a phone for a moment. The endpoint needs to register to Asterisk. This is why we would use host equals dynamic setting for that phone. When the phone registers to Asterisk, this is the phone reporting to Asterisk what its IP address is. I mean, yes, authentication. Here's my username that has to match the section header. It has also, my password has to match the secret. But this is also how Asterisk knows where that endpoint is on the network. So without registration, Asterisk will not know how to send a call to the phone with host equals dynamic. So that's the benefit of using this setting. You could just say host equals the literal IP address or a resolvable host name, if this is what you want to do there too. And usually host equals username is host equals host name is what you would use in the case of a provider, right? And you have yes. You would say host equals VoIPprovider.org or whatever it might be. Yeah. So you wouldn't write literally host name. You'd write the host name. Question in the back? How would I accept registration from accept a registration from multiple endpoints? So what we're looking at here, I'm going to back up one slide here. What we're looking at here is the configuration for a single phone. So you'll just have another section for each phone that you want to register to Asterisk, right? So every phone will have its own section. Am I getting closer to your question? Okay. Are you talking about having multiple providers? Are you talking about having multiple VoIP providers? Okay. So again, you would have, because from the perspective of Asterisk, a SIP trunk, a SIP provider is just another endpoint. Now, you can have Asterisk register to it, or you can have Asterisk handle calls coming from it, but ultimately, that's just another endpoint to be configured in SIP.conf. So it'll have its own section header as well. Yeah. Now, let's see, oh, here we go. So host equals dynamic. That's the setting for the phones if you're going to register to Asterisk. This is reporting the IP address there. And finally, we come to context. Who is familiar with the concept of context in Dialplan? If you're here this morning, all right. So what is a context in Dialplan? I saw hands. Okay. Yes?
Essentially applications, so context is like for say you have multiple customers, you use one customer for own context and then one for context.
Yeah, exactly right. And what I like to say there too is a context is essentially a container, right? And that container has a list of extensions. Now we know that I harped on it. What is an extension in Asterisk? What is it not? It's not a phone. Yeah, it's not necessarily a phone. You can dial an extension, it'll ring a phone perhaps. But ultimately, that's what a context is, a container of functionality, that functionality being provided by extensions. So, and just for bonus points, what's a priority in Dialplan? Let me see who was awake this morning. Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. So I'll repeat that. Sorry? Execution priority, exactly, because the extension can have multiple items to execute, multiple applications. So the first one may be dial, and the next one may be voicemail, and so forth and so on. All right. Okay. So about users, peers, and friends. Users, inbound only. No outbound. By the way, inbound and outbound here, this is from the perspective of Asterisk. So whenever you see some documentation or a forum post and someone's saying inbound, outbound, just put yourself in the seat of Asterisk, okay? Inbound only, meaning inbound to Asterisk. If I have a phone that's set at a type equals user, that phone can dial an extension into Asterisk, and then that can do something, right? Maybe it dials out of the building, maybe it rings some internal phone, whatever that does. But Asterisk cannot send a call to that user, right? Asterisk can send calls to peers. So that's why we have peers listed as inbound and outbound. I know the previous slide said outbound. Well, it is outbound. It's also inbound. You can set that for a peer. The real difference being a peer matches on IP address. So, hand? For users, you're matching on username, right? So for one example I've seen is emergency phones maybe on a campus that you only want those to send calls to Asterisk, so to the server, to the PBX. And it's the sort of thing where it's auto dial, so you just pick it up and you're immediately connected to the emergency services. That'd be one use case. So I started to go technical with that answer, but I need to give you a use case first. So the technical side of it is it only matches inbound calls on username. So the SIP URI, who's familiar with the concept of a SIP URI? Yeah. SIP URI is a really interesting, to me at least, but I may have a bias, very interesting concept. Much like an email address could just be jhester@digium.com, a SIP URI can essentially hold the same format. The only difference is it's SIP : and then jhester@digium.com. By the way, you can't send me a call on that. That's not a valid SIP URI. It's just an example for now. But what you can do with a SIP URI is essentially send a call just like you would send an email. That's the whole point of VoIP, right? So the SIP URI is broken up into those different sections. Picture in your mind jhester@digium.com. Maybe we don't use a host name. Maybe it's just an IP address on my Asterisk box, jhester@10.10.10.50, right? If I have an Asterisk box that has a jhester SIP account set up in sip.conf, registered, I can send a call to that endpoint using that SIP URI. There's the username, jhester@hostname, or IP address, really. So if the phone is a type equals peer, and that phone makes a call into Asterisk, it will match the IP address in that SIP URI in the from header. Who's heard of from header before? Okay, a whole 5 of you. So the from header, let's talk about that for just a second. Whenever you're debugging SIP, and you should be using maybe Wireshark or some tool like this to debug your SIP packet captures when you run into issues, and you will, this is the nature of the game, you will see a SIP URI described as maybe jhester@IP address, right? When the call comes into Asterisk, if it's a peer, it'll match the IP address that in the from header. The from header is just one part of the SIP packet that essentially says this call is coming from jhester@IP address. Okay, so that's what's contained within the from header in a SIP packet. Everybody still with me? Everybody still here? Okay. All right. So that's how the IP address will match on a call coming into Asterisk. Again, this is where host equals literal IP address, or if the phone is already registered with Asterisk and you have host equals dynamic in sip.conf, and now Asterisk can recognize the IP address for the phone and say, oh, this is coming from Jay Hester. Again, if it's a type equals peer. If it's a type equals user or friend, then it'll match on username. So instead of matching everything coming after the @ sign in the SIP URI, the IP address or host name, now it'll match the username, which is before the @ sign in the SIP URI. Okay, so now for, oh, yes? Yes, in the section header, right? And now you use the word context there. You're talking about the section header and the square brackets in sip.conf. Yeah, and that's a really easy thing to do. Lots of people, we talk an awful lot about context, right? Really, that's a section header in sip.conf. It looks the same, so all is forgiven, right? But essentially, that's it's an account name, but we just call it generically a section header. So any asterisk config file is going to use that to define the beginning of a section. So in sip.conf, it's an account. In extensions.conf, it's a context. All right. Let's see. So yeah, inbound call is matching on the username, and now we know where to send the call. So let's look again at our example here. Context equals inside. So we know a context is a container of functionality. It's a section or a big chunk of your dial plan. What we're defining here is what part of the dial plan this phone can dial. So this assumes that I have an inside section header in extensions.conf. That's my inside context. And any extensions in that section, those are the only extensions that this phone can dial. So that's why we're defining this here in sip.conf. Any questions there? All right. Now we have a SIP account defined in Asterisk. We've given Asterisk some information about the phone. Now we have to tell Asterisk how to ring the phone. Here we are in extensions.conf where Dialplan is configured. And in my inside context, I have extend 6001, priority 1, and it's using the dial application. So you all saw the dial application in the previous sessions this morning. What's the first, I'll take just an answer from anybody as soon as you can call it out. What's the first parameter I pass to the dial application here? Technology, exactly. It's technology / what? Account name, yeah. So that must match a section header in sip.conf, right? That's how those connect. So here we're dialing account name, we just call it something generic, but again, that has to just match the section header in sip.conf. All right. Finally, we have a timeout, comma 20, that's how many seconds to ring the endpoint. So the phone will ring for 20 seconds, and if they don't answer, well, here, the call will just end. There's nothing else to do. We've only got the one priority. We'll see some multiple priorities here in a moment. Just to tie these together, let's assume that David dials 200 on his SIP phone. So the call comes into Asterisk, and Asterisk will say, okay, you're a friend, so I'm going to check your username. You're David. All right. Which context can you dial? So we go from context, or from sip.conf over to extensions.conf. We see, all right, within the inside context, you've dialed 200. Does anything match? Yes, it does. So we're going to dial a SIP endpoint named Kenny. As we saw on the previous slide, that must match a section header in sip.conf. So we can get a call back to Kenny. So it'll go back to sip.conf, username Kenny, and Kenny's host IP address is 192.168.101.35. And this is where Asterisk, again, can get a call back out to the endpoint. Now, this kind of assumes that we've said, literally typed, host equals the IP address. This scenario could occur, again, with host equals dynamic, provided that the Kenny endpoint has registered with Asterisk. Asterisk will not change the sip.conf file. It won't go in and rewrite the file for you and replace the word dynamic with the IP address. It caches that in memory. So you don't have to worry about constantly going back and helping Asterisk. No, it's host equals dynamic. Please stop doing that. This is not how it works. And finally, we have to configure the endpoint itself. So far, we've given Asterisk some information about the phone, credentials, essentially, in what context, this sort of thing. And we've given the dial plan something to do in order to ring that endpoint, now we have to tell the endpoint how to register with Asterisk. And there are 3 ways that you can do this. One is manually. Who's configured, not just Digium phones, but any phones manually, one at a time? Was that a lot of fun? How many, well, let me ask this question. How many phones were you doing? Was it more than 2? Probably wasn't fun, yeah. So you can do it manually, that's an option. Less painful options have come about thanks to the SIP protocol. DHCP option 66. Has anyone used this before to provision phones? So, all right. I got a hand right here that shut up really fast. Why is that so great versus manual? Yes. That is an excellent explanation that I was about to give, but thank you. I'll repeat that. But the real question was, why is it so great? That's true. It's really great because you can just configure all your phones in one fell swoop, so to speak. You don't have to go and touch every phone, right? So I'll repeat what he said there. DHCP option 66, that's just something you can use to essentially report to the phone where to find its configuration on the network. And this is not an Asterisk thing, this is a SIP thing. So any DHCP server you have will provide this option, whether it's running on Linux or Windows or whatever it might be. Essentially, you're just giving the phone some instructions to pull down the config. So, and that configuration, depending on what vendor you've gone with your phones, could be just a pile of XML files, not just the one. We were talking about, was it contacts.xml a little bit earlier for your Cisco phones? Or so for this reason, it's a lot less painful to use DHCP option 66. And again, that's just something that applies to SIP phones in general. Now with the Digium phones, we have DPMA, or the Digium Phone Module for Asterisk. Before I launch into that, by the way, you don't have to use this if you're using a Digium phone, right? Digium phones are SIP compliant, so you can use them with any SIP compliant technology. You can use option 66, you can just register it or set it up manually and have it connect to some non-Asterisk thing that can use the SIP protocol. That's perfectly doable, and people do it all day, every day. But with DPMA, your life gets a lot easier. You have a lot more granular control, and you can do a lot more really nifty built-in things. Provisioning through DPMA is a lot easier because you don't have to get involved with necessarily a database to fill in the XML files as you were describing, this sort of thing. Let's look at resdigiumphone.conf. This is just 2 of the sections in another file, and I don't want to confuse you here. I was talking about going into the phone and configuring the phone, and now we're back in Asterisk. What's going on here? Well, this is how we can configure the phone from Asterisk. So this is not sip.conf. This is not setting up a SIP account per se. This is configuring a phone to have a certain, well, configuration, right? Who's used DPMA here? So just a couple of you? Okay. So essentially, the experience for the administrator is a little bit more configuration in the etc asterisk directory for the res_digium_phone.conf file. And for the user, it is essentially, well, let me just put my phone on the network here. I see a list of servers I can provision from. I'll select my server from the list on the phone itself. I'll select my account name. Maybe I'll have a PIN. Maybe I'll have a global PIN. Maybe there's no PIN number at all, and I can just pull down the configuration there. So some of you that were here just before we began, you saw actually DPMA provision. So what you were looking at on the screen, it looked like a call, but it wasn't. It was an out-of-band message, so, well, several out-of-band messages. DPMA uses out-of-band SIP messaging to communicate between a Digium phone and Asterisk to provision, but also to register and that sort of thing too. So let's talk about the actual config itself. Here we have 2 sections for the phone. We have Allen_D70, and that's just the name of the phone. This is a name that's just easy for you to remember, essentially. And it's defined by the type equals phone. So any settings in this section are going to apply to the phone. Just below this, we have another section that has type equals line. So now we're defining the line, not the phone. And the line is analogous to the SIP account. And notice, by the way, we have line label equals, in this case, Allen 600, extend 6001. Not sure why my line label wouldn't say 6001, but This is just on PowerPoint. So, we're describing a SIP account, but we have no credentials here. We're not actually giving the phone some information about how to authenticate to Asterisk. That's because with DPMA, you can reuse the accounts defined in SIP.conf. Questions there? Or maybe, okay. Thought I saw a hand almost going up. So both of these sections are used to configure a phone using DPMA. Notice also that line, just here, line equals SIP account name. This phone section is going to point out to different sections within resdigiumphone.conf. So in SIP.conf, there was one section, and you have just a bunch of configuration for that SIP account. And in resdigiumphone, you'll have a phone which points to other sections. So let's look at a real actual configuration for DPMA. I'm going to flip over here to my server. So this is what I was talking about a moment ago. This is what my Asterisk CLI looks like when I register a phone with DPMA. Yes? So the DPMA actually will automatically generate a phone book, and any other phones provisioned with DPMA. So you guys saw the D70, all the nifty smart BLF keys on the side. So any endpoint in that phone book for that D70, it will automatically show you present, state, and all that for anybody else in the phone book. Yeah. So automatically, so to speak. So I promised I wouldn't say the word automatically. I just said it there, but that's the last time. Okay. So this is what the Asterisk CLI looks like when you provision a phone using DPMA. Again, this is all of the out-of-band messaging, so to speak. This is not actually a call taking place. This is just me hitting register on the phone. And now my phone is registered. I'm going to leave my CLI and go into the Asterisk directory, and we'll have a look at resdigiumphone.conf. So here, let's look at Grace's phone. So Grace's phone, it's just called Grace's D70, and type equals phone. So now we know everything within this section will be defining the phone itself. This is pointing to a network named Network 1, a firmware section named firmware-D70_1_4. That name could be longer if you want, or shorter. Really depends on what you want to achieve. And it's pointing to a line section called Grace's phone. And we have some other configuration for the phone itself. We can define a full name. This is how their name will appear on the list to select from on the phone itself. So again, when your users want to pull down their account to their phone, they'll see what you define here on that list. The time zone, I think we're all comfortable with the concept of time zone. You can describe what time zone the phone will use. Active ringtone, here's guitar strum. Has anybody played with all the ringtones that are included with the Digium phones? So guitar strum is one of them. In my opinion, not the very best, but near the top. Several of them are included. You can define a MAC address for the phone itself. So you can essentially say this phone's MAC address must match, otherwise you can't provision. So just another way to keep up with what phone is where and what it's being used for. And record own calls. Do we want the phone to be able to record their own calls or no? Again, these are just a few of the options that you can set. Of course, with the sample files, everybody saw the sample files earlier that are included with Asterisk? Okay, I'll take a peek at those. I'm getting a few nods, a few shakes, so we'll take a look at those in just a moment. But the sample files essentially are, for the longest time, they've been the de facto documentation for the Asterisk project, and they're just shipped with Asterisk. That is to say, if you download the source code and compile Asterisk from source, you will have the option of making the sample files, so to speak. There's a command, make samples. It'll just copy all those sample files out of the source directory into your Etsy Asterisk directory, and you can use that to get a feel for what Asterisk is doing. A lot of documentation is showing up on the wiki now as far as being updated, just constantly updated, versus, some sample file that I downloaded 2 years ago, maybe check out the wiki for the latest and greatest info. In any case, that's an aside for the sample files there. Now, Grace's D70, that points to Grace's phone. So now we have another section called Grace's phone, and the type equals line. So this is, again, sort of the modular nature of DPMA. We've got a phone defined, and that points to other sections. So now we have type equals line. We defined our digit map. In this case, the phone would essentially dial 4 digits, beginning with 0 through 8. Right? Again, this is something very much in the phone. We're going to touch on pattern matching in the Dialplan. That's a separate thing. Line label, Grace's phone, this amounts to caller ID, but really what you see on the screen itself once the phone provisions. We're also defining a mailbox, more about that in a bit. The contact and extend 6002, contact being use the default phone book that's generated by the DPMA. Now, I hit a button, okay. So there's line. We're also pointing to a few other things here, network and firmware. So guess what that means? We have other section headers in this file that have a type equals network or a type equals firmware, and that's what this is referring to. Right, so if I bounce down just a bit, we see our firmware section here. And again, it's just type equals firmware, and the section header name matches what I've defined in the phone section. Firmware equals firmware-70_1_4. And if I go up just a bit, I should see my network section. And here it's called network 1. That can be called, my network, or inside network, or outside network, network at the other office, whatever you need to call that. This is how we can point to and use multiple settings with networks, but you define it once here, and any phone that wants to use that network, it just says network equals network 1. You define it the one time. All right. So again, this is how we can provision a phone using DPMA. Hey, PowerPoint, here we go. Using DPMA, using Digium phones. Any questions there? Make sure everybody's okay. Everybody's good there. Let's talk about PJSIP for just a moment. This is something shiny and new coming down the pike, introduced in Asterisk 12. PJSIP is a new channel driver for the SIP protocol. So what is a channel driver really? We've really been talking about the SIP channel driver so far. That's a module in Asterisk chan SIP. It's chan_sip.so. Let me pull that up on my CLI here. I'm going to go back to my other. Here's a nifty command. Module show like SIP. All right, so I got 2 matches. I was looking for chan_sip.so. I also got a hit on app ADSI prog because SIP appears in that, so that's not exactly what I was looking for. That's a different module. So chan_sip.so, that's the channel driver for the SIP protocol, and it's been around Asterisk for a very long time. Some would say the beginning because this is the channel driver that was used for the first SIP calls through Asterisk. Now, this channel driver is still going to be available with Asterisk 12 and 13 going forward, but you will also be able to use PJSIP. This is a separate project that the Asterisk developer community decided to use as a replacement for the venerable chan_sip.so module. Essentially, you can use both, but the idea is using PJSIP going forward. You don't have to, let me stress that. You don't have to use PJSIP. You can still use chan_sip in 12 and 13. They still work. I know, I've used them. But PJSIP is essentially just another way of configuring a SIP endpoint with a different channel driver. So here we have in the Etsy Asterisk directory pjsip.conf, and notice the modularity here, probably familiar from the DPMA section. It's moving away from just a monolithic, here's a section for this phone, and here's everything you'll ever know about this phone in sip.conf. In pjsip.conf, we have several sections to describe the phone. Here we have a type equals transport. We have a transport section, not unlike the same sort of ideas as the network section we saw in DPMA, describing either UDP or TCP, what IP address to bind to, etc. We have an endpoint type. This is where we're describing, well, the endpoint. Remember earlier I mentioned that a SIP phone and a SIP trunk, from the perspective of Asterisk, is going to be really no difference. I just call them endpoints. That's my own habit, much to the chagrin of some. No, it's a phone. There's a huge difference between a phone and a trunk. Well, yes, and when you're configuring it, there are some differences, true. But ultimately, it's just a SIP URI to get a call sent to or receive one from. It's not exactly the same. Here, we're using several sections to describe a single endpoint, right? So here, we're really talking about the configuration for a phone, a single phone that has an extension of 6001. Now, we named several of the section headers here 6001 in this example, but there's no type equals user or type equals friend for the account type. That was in sip.conf. So now we're going to describe the endpoint in the endpoint section. We'll describe the authentication in the auth section, that's second from bottom here. And we'll describe the address of record in the AOR section. Okay? Yes? Yes? Right. Oh, okay, I understand now, right. So I'll repeat the question for the group. The concern is the providers are not all going to begin using PJSIP, so what's going to happen when I start using PJSIP? This is really just the channel driver in Asterisk. Your provider can use whatever SIP stack they want. Ultimately, maybe they're using Asterisk, maybe they're using some other platform that just has a SIP stack that adheres to the SIP protocol, right? And that's the whole point of the SIP protocol, is that if you adhere to the protocol, you can make some connection with another endpoint, whether they're using PJSIP or chansip.so or some other platform. Is that cleared up? Okay. So if you're moving into Asterisk 12 and you have, maybe for at least a little bit, been using sip.conf and you're really just getting a handle on this and you don't want to move on to something new, well, first off, there's a lot of really great documentation in the sample file as well as on the wiki. There's also a very handy Python script that will help you convert your sip.conf file. It'll make a best guess at converting your sip.conf file into something usable in PJSIP. Now, as with anything that's going to just take your human written config file and turn it into something useful, it's not just an automatic, just hit the button and that was easy. You don't want to just dump that into your production server and say, well, I used the script. Why isn't it working? This is not what you want to do. You want to actually use the script to help you understand the way the configuration should look and build out from there. So I'll talk about a couple of things here. I'm going to change directory into my user source asterisk 11 directory here. And by the way, this is the directory that I've expanded the source code from. So when you download the asterisk source, it's just a tarball that you extract using tar, etc. And this is the result of it. In the contrib directory, let me bounce to the top here. Let's see. Oh, and this is asterisk 11, so I may not see it. No, I don't. Let me go to my asterisk 12 server. How about spelling asterisk correctly? How about that? Let's see, sip2. Oh, let's just see what's in there. Ah, I suspect it's in the scripts directory. Let's see what's. Okay. Yet another. The rabbit hole goes deeper. By the way, all of this is just part of the source code that ships with Asterisk, so a lot of this is here to help you for a myriad of different things. Scripts has the sip2 pjsip directory. We have a handful of Python scripts here, along with a pjsip.conf sample file and just a sip.conf file. Now, what this amounts to, you know what, let me take a look at my sip.conf. So here's just the sip.conf file that's already here. So I've been using the original SIP channel driver for a while on my Astra server, and now I'm going to make the leap to PJSIP. So I'll place my sip.conf file in this directory and run the script, and it looks like an awful lot of nothing happens. But we should see one extra file now. Yes, now we have a pjsip.conf file. And again, this is just as helpful as it can be Python script that will take your original sip.conf and convert it to something useful for the PJSIP channel driver. Right? These are the sections that, stop it, Vim. All right. These are the sections that come out of the script. Again, we have a transport-UDP. That's just the name of it. And the section type is a transport type. When I go down a bit further, I'll see my endpoint. In this case, it's just Mo's phone, which is shorthand for Melissa. I'll see my transport. Did it give it to me or no? Oh, it actually didn't define it. So this would be one example where, hey, I want this endpoint to use a given transport. So let's do transport equals transport-UDP. Again, transport equals would have to match the section header of the transport type section. Does that make sense? Okay. So there's our SIP to PJSIP Python script. Let's move on to our next little section here, review configuring endpoints. So we've had configuring an account with Asterisk, create an extension in Dialplan that will dial the endpoint, and then configure the endpoint itself to match. All right. Is everyone having as much fun as I am? Probably not. I'm having a lot of fun. Okay. So move on to our next one. We've got up to 3 o'clock, and then we'll have our afternoon caffeine break. So for those of you who are just joining us, my name is Justin Hester. I'm the Astra Technical Trainer. I'm DCAP 2252. If you really want to know my LinkedIn URL, just flag me down. I'll be glad to give it to you a little bit later. I'm on Twitter at Justin V. Hester. And of course, send me an email, jhester@digium.com, if you have any questions, or I love to reach out and connect with the community. So again, I'm available. Well, if I'm available, I'll be glad to respond to your email. Now we're going to talk about interactive Dialplan. So with interactive Dialplan, use more advanced applications. So the applications we've seen so far, Dial. I think maybe the morning session had no-op. What are some other Dialplan applications you saw this morning, or you've seen outside of this session? GoTo. Yeah. GoTo just sends you to some other part of the Dialplan. Yeah. All right, so we're going to talk about a few of those, and we're going to also build or begin discussing an IVR versus an auto-attendant. So who actually has a dog in that fight? No, it's an IVR, it's not an auto-attendant, or vice versa. Right. This is sort of the thing, right? These days, IVR, auto-attendant, this word is used interchangeably, but there is a specified difference, and some people are very, very, they are certain, no, that's an IVR, and you better not call it an auto-attendant, or vice versa. I worked very hard on that IVR. It's not an auto-attendant. So the different, sorry? Right, yeah, that's really the big difference, is with an IVR, it's going to reach out and, touch some other bit of the network or some other bit of hardware, some other data point, and then pull it back into the call, and that'll be a customized call for that particular user. Right? If I call, some cable provider, the menu I get up front is probably going to be generic. It's probably going to be press 1 if you need this, or 2 if you need that. That's what we traditionally call an auto-attendant. If I call my bank and I enter a PIN number and I hear information only I should hear on that call, that would be an IVR. This is the traditional separation between those two words. But you're forgiven for using those words interchangeably in some circles. In any case, This is just sort of some setup of vocabulary before we move on, so we don't get, have any more fist fights about IVR versus auto-attendant. Don't want things to get too rowdy. And here's an extra little bonus bit here. Best practice, always create an option 0 to transfer to a live person. I think this is typically what you would expect out of an IVR, but some places, they just don't do this, so maybe you want to consider this. Is there any other suggestions as far as what's a number to hit or a DTMF digit to hit to automatically speak with a person? It's pretty much 0. Okay. So here we have a section header in extensions.conf. That's a context. The name of the context is AA_menu. And within this context, I have several extensions. Now, just as a SIP account doesn't, and in my opinion, shouldn't be the same thing as the number for that endpoint, it should be a name. An extension itself also does not have to be a number that you would dial. Here we see a couple of new extensions, maybe you're seeing for the first time, I, T, S. These are special extensions. Anybody dealt with special extensions in Asterisk before? So, yeah, I know you have. So a special extension within Asterisk essentially is triggered when a given condition is met. Right? So what I mean by that is, let's say this is our public-facing IVR menu or auto-attendant menu, and I dial in and I start with the S extension. Now, you don't necessarily have to have the S extension. It does stand for start. The start extension is useful when no DID or DID information is provided on the call. So imagine this, a call coming into your business, into Asterisk, and any inbound calls from outside of the building are going to go to the AA menu context. If those calls just ring, they don't actually provide an extension to dial, right? Then Asterisk has to do something with this call. And in that case, it's going to go to the S extension, right? This is something you encounter with, POTS lines traditionally, but with VoIP, it's not such a big deal. So the S extension is really here for those sort of edge cases, but also historical purposes. So the S extension, that's triggered when there's no DID information provided. The I extension, as well as the T, essentially are for errors. So imagine you have dialed in here, and I've heard my greeting message, and I'm deciding on what to dial, and I take a little too long. When you don't respond, you hit the response timeout, Asterisk will route your call to the T extension within the current context, if it exists. So there's a lot of things there that a lot of conditions you have to meet for that to occur. But let's talk about what's actually happening in the menu itself. So first we have Answer. Is that a new application for everyone? Who's seen Answer before? 2. All right, all 2 of you. So guess what the Answer application does? It answers, right? So this is very useful in certain situations where you need to pass media over the line, but you're not actually hitting the dial application per se. Now, this example is not super useful in the real world because the background application in the next priority, it actually will set up the call to pass media. We just include Answer here for a point of discussion, so I can have this sort of awkward moment where, well, this is what Answer does. We wouldn't use it here, but that's what it does. Essentially, it has to do with setting up early media on the channel. So there's also a Progress application that does something similar where you don't want to answer the channel, but you do want to allow media to pass over the line. So Answer, and then we have Background. Now I know this may be new. Has everybody seen a priority label before? Okay, so that was in the morning session. So we have a menu beginning priority label, and then the background application. Background is the older, more mature, cooler brother of playback. The playback application just plays back a sound file, right? The background application will play back a sound file while also accepting DTMF input. So this is how you can build an auto-attendant, IVR, whatever you'd like to call that. So here, background is playing back a sound file called main menu, and this main menu sound file would hopefully say something to the effect of, for our sales department, press 1. For our support department, press 2. For a dial by name directory, press 3. To speak with somebody, press 0. And I know that, I want that sound file to say that because that's what my menu actually does here. If they press 1, it'll route them to the sales queue. If I press 2, it'll route them to the support queue. See how this works? So this is how we can build a, to the nth degree of customization, you can build your menu to do exactly what you want. Ideally, the sound file is going to match the behavior, so you wouldn't just use a generic recording there. So we have the queue application. Was that mentioned this morning? So who's familiar with just call queues in general, just tech support, customer support, this sort of thing? This is how we set up, this is how we route a call to a call queue with an asterisk. Now, this assumes that I have defined a sales queue in a configuration file. Anybody want to take a guess at what that config file might be named? Queues. I heard somebody whisper it like it was a secret, and then, okay, some more brave souls. Yeah, queues.conf, right? So when they were naming these files, they're like, let's make it as easy as possible. So in queues.conf, exactly right, I've defined a sales queue, I've defined a support queue, and hopefully I have people logged into said queue to accept calls. There's also the directory application. The directory application, and you may have noticed when I was talking about the menu greeting, okay, press 3 for dial by name directory. Dial by name directory is, of course, please enter the last 3 letters of the person's first name or whatever it might be with your keypad. So you have to look at your keypad and, okay, where's the J, this sort of thing. That's what the dial by name directory is. And the directory application is how we set that up in Asterisk. By the way, that only requires a little bit of configuration in voicemail. We'll talk about voicemail in a bit, and I'll point it out to you again there. And finally, we have the 0 extension, dial 0 to dial a SIP endpoint named phone-2. All right. So I talked about T. That's the condition met if you time out. So let's say I listen to the menu background, the menu sound file from the background application, and wait extend, which will wait, in this case, 5 seconds, but it's going to wait for me to enter an extension, so wait extend. If I take too long, Asterisk will route me to the T extension, and then I can control the behavior that the user will experience there. So playback, I'm sorry, and then go to extension S, menu beginning priority label. See how that works? So what about I? Oh, questions? Very good question, very good question. So I'll repeat that. If you want to use the menu beginning priority label, do I have to define it higher in my config file before I refer to it somewhere lower? No, you don't. The Dialplan is loaded with an asterisk all at once. So Asterisk can see the Dialplan within that context. Now, what you wouldn't want to do is use goto to try to go to S, priority label that exists in some other context, right? If you want to do that, you would have to say go to context name, extension, priority, or priority label. So, very good question. Anything else about go to? All right. So, the I extension, as you probably guessed at this point, is for entering an invalid input, right? Again, the background application just listens for DTMF input, and it's just going to route you to an extension that exists within your current context. In my current context, I have 4 whole extensions, 1, 2, 3, and 0. If I hit 5, Asterisk is going to have nothing to do with me, so it'll send me to the I extension, the I special extension. And again, here I'm just going to play back invalid and go to the top. So, okay. Not getting any younger. You can, no worries. No. So, yes. Right. This is a context include. So, you wouldn't have a problem per se. You would have to wait a given amount of time for Asterisk to decide, so to speak. Oh, he's pressed 2. Well, he could be wanting to join the support queue, or he wants to dial some extension that starts with 2, maybe 2005 or whatever, right? So essentially you have to wait for the timeout for Asterisk to go, okay, he wanted 2, he didn't send me anything else, right? Now this is exactly why what you don't want to do is use extensions in the same, that begin with a number in the same range as your greeting menu, right? That's also why a lot of businesses have extensions that begin with 5,000 or 6,000 or so, because usually your menu is going to have, press 1 for this, 2 for that, 3 for this. You might have 4 or maybe 5 options, hopefully not so many, because they'll just go, I'll just email them. Say they begin with a range of 6,000. And I'm in this context, well, nothing will match here, so I'll search the include. Go find that extension and hopefully dial a phone. All right. One other thing, too, I want to talk to you about an E special extension, another special extension, the E special extension. Who's heard of that one before? Nobody? Any other special extensions you guys have dealt with? Just T, I, and S? That's it? Okay. So here's a bit of my dial plan. So here I am in IVR, my IVR context. Some of this is similar. The S extension is doing something a little different. We're using the set application. We'll talk about that in a bit with variables. But I want to look at the E extension here, and not necessarily its behavior, but just the idea that it exists. You may have noticed on the previous slide that T and I do essentially the same thing. They play back a different sound file, but they play back some sound file that says, you got it wrong, start over, right? If you have the same behavior for both, why write it twice? This was the essentially the mentality I would have to guess is behind the decision to have the E extension. This is error or either. I've heard it described as both. But in any case, if you time out or you dial something invalid, Asterisk will route to the E extension in both of those conditions. Okay, so that's what the E extension will do for you. And when you get into a situation like this, which again, we'll get to play with some advanced dial plan in a bit, you're building something a little more complex, why write that twice? Because if you ever want to change it or improve it, you have to improve it in both places. So just write it once, use the E special extension to catch both types of behavior. Like look over my shoulder and make sure everybody's back. So, some alternative approaches. This was very, very rudimentary. Use background, listen for DTMF, use wait extend to also listen for input or DTMF from the caller, and then route them to some extension I've written out. Another way to do this is using the read application with goToIf. So, you mentioned you saw goToIf you saw goTo this morning. Was goToIf a topic of discussion too? So, who wants to make a guess as to what that does? There's goTo, but yeah, exactly. So, with the goTo, it's just go to some other part of the dial plan. In the example there, it's evaluate whether or not a certain condition is true or false, and if it's true, go to this place, and if it's false, go to this other place within the dial plan. Right? So that's goToIf. Read application. Who's seen that before? So what's the green shirt? What's the read application do for us? Right. Yeah. It's kind of like background. So background plays a sound file and then just listens for DTMF input and allows Asterisk to route you to an extension you're dialing within your context. The read application also plays back a sound file, also listens for DTMF input, but now it will store that as the value of a dial plan variable. And then you can use that dial plan variable within an expression in goToIf. So once we get into expressions in the next module, a lot of that will not sound like gibberish. So we'll get there. So yeah, that's one example. Another one is another item, really. It's not so much an IVR approach, but the record application. So we're introducing you to just a few more applications as we go. We've seen dial and goTo and queues, etc. Record will allow you to allow Asterisk to record whatever you say on that call. So if I dial extension 6000, it's going to ring some phone. If I dial extension 2020, then it will hit and it hits the record application. It will save whatever I say into a sound file in the Asterisk server. And then you can call that with playback or background or whatever. So this is very handy if you need to quickly, very quickly just like put together a menu, right? So let's see if my server actually has an example. By the way, who's using Asterisk? Okay, Asterisk? Have you seen this before? So let me talk about that for just a second then. So there's Asterisk-R, a remote connection to Asterisk. Because I am king of the tab button, I just ride that thing constantly. I wear them out. I like Asterisk because I can get just this far and hit tab, and now I'm at my Asterisk CLI. That's just me. That's just my habit. That's what I do. A few caveats there, which you can quickly fix. What's the command to join a remote connection but also set my verbosity level at 4? Right, as many V's as you want, right? Just asterisk, R, now my verbosity level is set to 4. If I leave here and I do asterisk, I can still do dash VVV. I can still do this as well. If you just do asterisk, it's going to use your default. If your default is set to verbosity level 0, you're going to go, where's my output? I see nothing. I'm trying to debug this situation. Very good question. I'm going to do it in my asterisk config file. This is the main asterisk configuration file, right? Being the main asterisk config file, you have to restart the service. With sip.conf, right, several of the other modules really, but with sip.conf, for example, when you make a change in sip.conf, you have to go to your CLI and say sip reload. You make a change in extensions.conf, you go to your CLI and say Dialplan reload. With this file, if I make a change, I'll have to do a service asterisk stop, service asterisk start, or service asterisk restart, or however you'd like to do that. So here, I'm just going to set my verbosity level to 5. Not recommended for just all day, every day. Your log files will fill up a hard drive. But while we're talking, just the 100 of us. Okay. So now if I do core set verbose 5, it says it's still 5. That's my default verbose level, or verbosity level. Now, we were at read, go to if, record. Okay, had to remind myself really quick. So, from the CLI, my favorite CLI command is Dialplan show. Does anybody else love Dialplan show? All right, my job is to convince you before you leave. Who's heard of Dialplan show before right now? Okay, so not all of you. You've got a little work to do then. Dialplan show is just going to print out on your Asterisk CLI what Asterisk thinks your Dialplan is. And I choose those words carefully because writing something out in extensions.conf and then Dialplan reload and then making some test calls and then just staring at your config file is not really the best way to go through life. You want to watch your CLI for issues. You want to do Dialplan show to see what Asterisk thinks you want to happen. Okay, and Dialplan show is great for a couple of reasons. There's Dialplan show for the whole thing. I'll just scroll up past there. You can specify a context. So I just want to look at my IVR menu. So I'm going to do Dialplan show IVR, and I can see what's configured right now on my Asterisk CLI. So my IVR has a couple of options here. There's 0 to go to a phone, 1 for the support queue, 1 for sales queue, et cetera, et cetera. Also, we have E and S. We mentioned those a bit earlier. Oh, and 4 for ConfBridge. ConfBridge is an application that, guess what it does? Joins a conference call, right? Here, the conference call is just named, or the bridge itself is just named Classroom. So again, if you want to give people access to a conference room as soon as they hit your public-facing IVR, okay, you can do that with Asterisk if you like. In any case, now I have a printout of my IVR. This is what I would use to record a greeting if I wanted to. I'm going to bounce out of here Everybody seen the trick on how to use a Linux command from the Asterisk CLI? Start with a bang? Okay, start with a bang. And I'm going to look at extensions.conf. It's the one place tab complete doesn't work, so it hurts. It hurts sometimes. All right, now I want to say there's a extension. Yeah, here we go. So I do have an extension here, no H, for the record application. What I've defined for the record application here is melsfile.gsm. So .gsm is just the storage format for the sound file itself. I'm using that because on this virtual machine, I just have GSM sound files already defined. You can compile Asterisk with support for several different types of sound files, so G711 and WAVE and so forth. Here we're just using GSM because it's lightweight and I'm just doing a little virtual machine setup. So the record application will say, will record anything I say into the call, into the phone, to that file name. And we can see here, playback Mels file. And notice that the playback does not actually reference the file format. The file format is already defined when the call is set up, right? Playback, all it cares about is the file name. Who knows where Asterisk stores these sound files? Barlib Asterisk sounds, yeah, exactly right. Do you know about the text file that will tell you all the scripts in the sound file? So this is, here. var lib asterisk sounds. So I'm going to do an ls here. Hold on. Just buckle up. Okay. Huge list. These are all the sound files that are included with Asterisk. And, okay, well, I want to build my own IVR. Let me start now and listen to all these sound files and write down what they say, and I may be done sometime when Asterisk, 15 comes out, right? Or you could just use the text files that are included. They're in this directory, and this is why I like to use grep. So I'm going to use grep. That's just a Linux command that lets you search for a given string within a file. So you're not just looking for the name of a file. I'm looking for a list of characters, a string of characters, inside the text file. So I'm going to grep for the word re-record. So that's the word I'm looking for inside of the core sounds-en.txt file. So that's one of the text files here. I believe my server actually has a couple. Let's do a quick test here. Yes, so I have core sounds as well as extra sounds. So I'm going to look for the word re-record in both of them. So all that's going on here is I am using the grep application to look for the word re-record inside of anything in this directory that ends with the letters txt. In other words, search within any text file that's in my current directory, my present working directory. And here are the hits. So now, without even having to listen to the sound file, I know what the file will say. And this is what I was looking for, VM review. Okay, so that's the name of the file. This is all I need to pass to the playback application or the background application, and those applications will play back the sound file, and I know that it will say, in Allison's voice, press 1 to accept this recording, press 2 to listen to it, press 3 to re-record your message. So in this way, you can very quickly, sort of cobble together a little menu for certain things. The Dialplan we were looking at a moment ago, for the record application, it really just does the two things. It records, and then I can call a different number to play it back, but maybe I can build something a little more intelligent, right? So we'll see if we can knock out an example of that later in the talk. All right. Now my phones. Would anyone like to volunteer to record my menu? Not a one of you. Okay. Let me pull up my Dialplan again. Step right up. We can. Okay. All right. We'll try this. I use the handset because feedback is only fun if you're named Jimi Hendrix. All right. I have dial tone. Please press 1 for support, press 2 for sales, press 3 for dial by name directory, press 4 to join the conference, or 0 to call the local phone. All right. And it just hung up. Oop. Now if only I could hang up. So, that probably wasn't very exciting at all, was it? Because I didn't have my CLI up. Let's do that again. Hey, would everybody like to play? Let's all record the menu at the same time. Doesn't sound like fun, doesn't it? Okay. Oh, all right. Now I'm going to call my other extension, Dialplan show, which I believe was just 2223. There it is. Press 1 for support, press 2 for sales, press 3 for dial by name directory, press 4 to join the conference, or 0 to call the local phone. So you can see my CLI play out here exactly what's happening on the call, and it's just playing Mel's file, right? So again, this is very useful in situations where maybe you need to very quickly record a greeting menu, or you very quickly record a sound file that's going to play back to anyone who calls in because we had to close, tornadoes are coming, so please call back later, this sort of a thing. Any questions about how record works versus playback? All right. Now let's look at voicemail just momentarily before we hit our afternoon caffeine break. I wouldn't dare deprive anyone at this conference of a caffeine break. So 4 steps for voicemail. Create a mailbox, send calls to the mailbox, that's in Dialplan. Let the user know they have a message, and allow the user to retrieve the message. That's why we're going to see 2 new applications introduced in the next section there. But first, voicemail.conf. All right. Before we launch into that, who would like to get a head start on everyone else for that caffeine break? I got 2 minutes till 3. Is that accurate for the 3 p.m. break? Everybody good? Okay. We'll go ahead and break then. Yes. Thanks for stepping up, everyone. Buy this man an extra shot of espresso. Well, in the interest of time, I'm going to move forward with voicemail. If you really, really, really want to know about voicemail, then here we are. If not, okay, take a nap, talk amongst yourselves, that's fine. Doesn't hurt my feelings. So voicemail, let's get a rolling start. I'm going to back up one slide. Alternative IVR approaches. Actually, and I failed to mention a couple things here. Text-to-speech. Is anybody familiar with Kepstrel, their product? Okay, so what is, are you guys using it? No? What does Kepstrel do? What would you, are you using any alternatives to Kepstrel? Let me ask that question, that might be better. Right, text-to-speech, yeah, that's the purpose of it, right? But yeah, are you guys using an alternative to Kepstrel, or? Okay, I see, okay. Just curious, I was looking for more info there. So essentially this product is text-to-speech. It will take some text input and generate voice. So imagine Microsoft Sam, but a lot better, professional grade better. There's also ASR, automatic speech recognition. One of these products actually has a booth set up, LumenVox, and there's also a Vestec. Again, ASR may be a little more fitting for the description of an IVR, an interactive voice response, because it's responding to your voice inputs, or maybe text-to-speech. In other words, the system is generating speech, not just playing back canned sound files, but generating speech. So it's responding with voice. In any case, those are 2 bullets I didn't want to leave behind as we move forward into voicemail. So voicemail. We have 4 steps to configure voicemail. Again, step 1, create the mailbox. You have to store it somewhere. Send calls to the mailbox. An empty mailbox can't be checked, really. I mean, you can check it. There's nothing there. Notify the user. In other words, make the little red blinky light blink on their phone. This is message waiting indicator, or MWI is what we refer to that as. Finally, we need to give the user some mechanism to retrieve their voicemail or retrieve their message. So first, we're going into voicemail.conf. What's the directory this is stored in? Anybody in the room? Etc asterisk. Yeah, exactly. So it's an asterisk config file, etc asterisk. That's where, by default, asterisk will store, where you will store all of your asterisk configuration files. So voicemail.conf in the etc asterisk directory, and we have a general section. You have probably noticed already that there is a general section in every config file that you will encounter in asterisk, save for chan.e, but that's for a different talk. Then we have here zone messages. This is a section where you can configure the behavior of the voicemail application depending upon what location they're in, right? So in some parts of the country, they like to hear the day before the month. Some parts of the world, not parts of the country, maybe. Some parts of the world, they expect to hear the day before the month as opposed to the month before the day, etc. So this is a sort of behavior you can control in zone messages. And finally, we have a default section. This is the voicemail context of default. Now, I know what you're thinking. Calm down, all of you. You're all so hectic now. The voicemail context is not a Dialplan context. It's a completely separate idea. Separate really being the idea. Here we have a default context, but you can define other voicemail contexts. Imagine, say you have a multi-tenant system, right? You have business A and business B that's using the same asterisk system, and they both want the same range of internal extensions. And since our extension number tends to be the same as our voicemail box number, doesn't have to be, but it tends to be, it's easy to remember. Well, if they both have the same range, you can see where an issue might occur. If you leave a message in mailbox 7002, then either business could check that message, right? So we can separate this out with voicemail context. We can have a business A context, and their mailbox 7002 is completely different from the voicemail box 7002 and the business B voicemail context. Is that clear for everybody? Everybody on board with this? Just make sure we're getting, okay. Got some good momentum coming out of the caffeine break. All right. So within the context, we're defining a mailbox here, 7001 is mapped to a PIN number, 9999. Then we have a comma to delimit our next section, and that is first name space last name. So a quick word about white space in these config files. There are a few places where you'll want to see white space in a config file. In the examples you've seen so far, it tends to be surrounding a little rocket. I'm talking about the equals greater than. I've been polling my classes over the past year for a good name for this because equals greater than is a bit of a mouthful. So rocket is what I've decided. It gets the most votes. It tends to get the most chuckles. Okay, that's still winning by a long shot. Versus arrow, that's kind of, okay, arrow, it's a little boring, but rocket, oh, that's much more fun. So we have 7001 mapped to this PIN number, comma, first name, space, last name. The space between the first and last name is important. Remember the directory application I mentioned in the previous section. That directory application depends on this configuration to function. You don't have to go into some other directory.conf file and say, you know, this person's number is this person's first name and last name and so forth. This is actually where the directory application will look for that person's first or last name, depending on the behavior you've configured in your Dialplan. So for Alan Dorner, if I hit the dial by name directory application, I would have to spell out DOR, and it should send me to his extension. Yes? What if you have an extension? Mm-hmm. If you don't want them to have a voicemail, what you're defining here is the voicemail box, and they would have it defined, but if they never have an extension that actually points to the voicemail box, no messages would be left in the mailbox. Does that make sense? Yes, if someone pushes it to the extension, I guess that would work that way, yeah. If it's defined, it would have to. Which is one of the caveats, I guess, of setting up, well, the convenience that comes along with the directory application reading from this file. So I'll repeat that actually for the rest of you that weren't facing the direction I was. What if you want an extension, but you don't want that extension to have a voicemail box, but you do want the extension to be accessible from the directory application that uses this configuration. Essentially, the mailbox is configured here. That's what directory reads from, even though you don't have to set up a mechanism to leave a message or even retrieve a message from the mailbox. But if the mailbox exists, you could, in theory, still forward a message to that mailbox. Again, this is all maybe a little theoretical, but the idea is sound. The opposite direction. Right. So there's a way to define within directory which of the voicemail contexts you can access. Right. So it's one of the arguments you would pass to it. So, did everybody see the core show application command earlier? Yeah. Okay. So the so-called man page, or the help file for directory, will give you all the parameters you want to pass there. Yeah. You can specify which voicemail context you want to access with directory. All right. A flag for. Hey, let's see. Let's check our sample file. So I'm going to look in. By the way, this is the directory, if you were looking for that, that contains the sample files with the basic Asterisk that ships with Asterisk. Let's see, I'm looking for voicemail.conf.sample. And I'm going to look for, let's see, what's the flag you said that was called? Exclude, all right, let's see. Pattern not found, all right. Let's see if I'll have better luck with grep. Not found. So if there is a flag, it's not listed as exclude. Yeah, let's try that. Permit finding. Yep, there it is, hide from dir. Hide this mailbox from the directory produced by app directory, which is, I'll just open it up for less. How about less? And then so hide this mailbox from the directory produced by app directory. The default is no. So there we go. We have an answer to that question. If we set this parameter for that mailbox, then it will not show up in the directory application. So we wouldn't even have to separate it out into its own special context, voicemail context. We could just use this parameter. Very cool. So that's the thing about these sample files too. There are so many options in so many sample files. No one is going to, maybe they would, and I'd be rather impressed if they did. No one's going to sit down and memorize everything in every sample file. So I fully expect to run into this sort of thing all the time. Whereas, oh yeah, it's now I know, it's hide from dir, right? So until I actually hit that sort of a use case, well, until I see that, no reason to really look it up. So again, this is why I keep a copy of the sample files on my MacBook at all times too. Let's go back. All right. Okay, so now we've defined our mailbox in voicemail.conf. In our Dialplan, we need to provide some way for our message to be left. Here we see in our phones context a couple of extensions. Now we have dial SIP endpoint named O2 Digium, and then 7002 extension will dial a SIP endpoint named O1 Zoiper, and it will ring for 20 seconds. After the 20 seconds passes, that is, if the O1 Zoiper SIP endpoint, if they don't answer within that 20-second period, it will exit priority 1 and go to priority 2. And these are executed one at a time, back to back. That's the whole concept of priorities. I'm sure Melissa mentioned that this morning. And the one argument we're passing to voicemail is 7002. This will assume that there's a voicemail box defined in voicemail.conf as 7002, because that's where we want to leave a message. Now, who's familiar with the extend variable? We'll talk about variables in a moment, but yeah, so very popular option here instead of typing 7002 over and over. So we hit voicemail application. Whatever happens here, they leave a message, they hang up, they don't leave a message, and then it exits the priority 2, goes to hang up, and hangs up the call. So now that the message is left, we want the endpoint to know, well, we really want the user to know that they have a message waiting, and this is how we set message waiting indicator. In sip.conf, we'll go to the section for that phone and say mailbox equals and the mailbox number. This is where Asterisk is configured to essentially make the little red light blink on the phone. Until you configure this, you can leave a message in the mailbox, but the phone will never know that there's a message waiting. So this is how we control the behavior. That's step 3 in our 4-step process. And finally, we have the voicemail main application. This is where you can retrieve a message. So all by itself, if you just call an extension that dials or calls the voicemail main application with no parameters passed within its parentheses, it will ask you for the mailbox number and the PIN number, and now you can check your voicemail. You could pass the mailbox number as an argument, but you wouldn't want to set that up with a generic extension, because then everybody can call your voicemail box and listen to your messages if they have your PIN number. So here we just have 8002 voicemail main, and it'll challenge you for the voicemail box number as well as your PIN number. This also lets you manage your messages just as you would expect from any sort of phone system, right? Same thing with cell phones. You can listen to messages, you can forward them, you can delete them, etc. You can change your PIN number. When you dial into, in this example, 8002, and you change your PIN number, Asterisk will write the PIN number to voicemail.conf. So that's a little different behavior than we've seen in other examples. But again, this is just something to be mindful of when you're working with voicemail and Asterisk. All right. There's our interactive dial plan. We used more advanced than just dial. So we talked about a few of those and the differences between IVR and auto-attendant, and also set up voicemail for an endpoint. Any questions before we move on to the next book? All right.